Welcome to Ask Between the Keyframes on Motionographer.
So we have another Motionographer Ask Between the Keyframes question. This is kind of a long question, so I'm going to summarize it into a shorter, more concise question, and that is, what should a junior artist look to learn if they want to move into a creative leadership role?
Aaron, you've worked as a creative director for a long time, and what do you think are some of those key skills?
A lot of them we talk about all the time are soft skills. So not only developing like the talent of a designer, but communication skills and interpersonal skills. So I think people have to remember that they're not only going to be advising people on projects and like what looks better, but on their careers and bigger picture things, sometimes even work-life balance. They'll also have to be able to plan with the coordinators and producers on how the flow of a job works. And they'll also, at some studios, be accountable about how the budget is allocated and ultimately how it goes at the end of a job as well, especially if you're not listening, you know what I mean? Listening to the client and spending money on something that if you were listening, you could have figured it out with the producer a better way. Those are total communication and interpersonal skills.
Well, I was going to say, speaking of communicating with the client and navigating their feedback, that's huge, right? So being able to listen and interpret the feedback and to accurately communicate and direct the creative team, whether it's designers, animators, to implement those changes and make sure that that's staying on track, that the client's being heard, and it's the right feedback and you're giving them what they're asking for.
Now, as a junior artist, you're not going to be asked to do that. So what I would recommend is to see if you could sit in on calls and listen. Don't talk unless you're invited to talk, especially if you're not introduced on a phone call. But do everything you can to kind of read the emails. How is your producer writing about things and creative director writing about things? How are they speaking to their client? Learn from all the good examples and the bad examples, like, oh, the client didn't like being talked to like that. Those are all things that you have to pick up on because you're not going to be doing it until you're doing it. So you have to learn from what you're seeing happening around you.
Along these lines, what about the ability for a creative brief to put together a brief? Again, it kind of comes back to that interpretation skills. Like, can you interpret the brief that you're given? But if it isn't super dialed in, the brief, like then you got to really take it and you got to refine it and maybe even reinterpret or recreate that brief.
I think whenever somebody is hiring a design company, they're looking for a point of view, and that starts with the creative brief. When you get information from a client, you distill it into a brief. You talk about what they're looking for, who their audience is, any must-haves like brand standards, things like that, into a single place, a single document that your team can reference and say, okay, well, if I satisfy all these areas of the brief or all the, variables, then this is going to be appropriate, at least from the studio's perspective or the creative director's perspective. So you have to be able to write. You have to be able to say, the client said this, and that makes me think this, and this, and this. And that's not an easy thing. It's sometimes, especially when you're on a conceptual level, and it's like, don't use pink. More than don't use pink, the client hates pink. You know what I mean? That's like an easy thing to write. But when you start talking about more abstract things and you want to leave space for your designers to interpret that, that gets into tricky writing territory. So being able to do that as concisely as possible is going to be really important.
There are certain things, if I need to construct a brief for a project, what are my specs, right? Like certain things I need the specifics, but then there's also like you said, the more conceptual, what's the tone that we're looking for? It's the thing I can keep coming back to when there's uncertainty and be like, this is the question and this is where we're putting all our energy towards answering.
And so as a junior artist, the way you can get better at writing is to write. So when you have an idea or a concept, don't just say it to the creative director in a group. When you actually have your treatment coming along, write a paragraph about it and send it to the creative director. If it's good, they'll use that in the treatment anyway, and you'll be saving your creative director time. If there's feedback and you're you're given it by your creative director or whomever, you can write back to that email and say, hey, I think we should try blah, 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 blah. Like, just get used to writing, getting used to writing in a formal sense and an informal sense, because those are going to be the building blocks of how you communicate with clients written.
If you don't get at least competent with being able to verbally and with words, with your writing, explain your ideas, then someone else will do that for you. And that someone else is going to be the creative lead, not you.
Yep.
Right? You. So it's like, if that's your goal, that's a skill. And along those lines, the ability to present, the presentation skills are huge. The salesmanship, the ability to rhetorically convince and persuade someone that, hey, this idea is awesome and we should give you money to do it.
Correct. And also presenting revisions, like you're constantly presenting, throughout the entire process. So again, try and sit in on as many of those presentations that your creative directors or creative leads will let you throughout your career. And as you present to your creative director or your team for Crit, then just kind of get in that mindset of like, yeah, it's casual. There's a casualness to it, but be concise as possible. Just start really working on that. Don't rely on other people around you to communicate your ideas for you. Do it for yourself, because that is going to get you. If you can articulate your idea in that context, they'll start allowing you to do it to clients.
Right. Which I think really brings us to that idea of, do you really want to be a manager, right? Because a creative lead is essentially a manager of sorts. It doesn't mean that you're not making things, but the further up you go in the creative leadership, you tend to get further and further away from the actual craft of sitting at the box or whatever that is, and actually the making. And you're spending more time on phone calls, in video, in Zoom calls, on writing documents, pitching documents, in meetings. It's like being a general as opposed to being a foot soldier. So it really is finding out like what works for you and what do you want to do, and you can excel in that area.
Okay, so to recap, communication skills, interpersonal skills, big time. Navigating client feedback, you're going to have to do. Got to be a writer. You got to be able to write, articulate your ideas.
Got to be a speaker.
Got to be able to speak and present, and be able to manage a team by reading the room, not overreacting, and also managing the flow of the project. So
that's right.
Get as much hands-on experience and know thyself.
Know thyself.
Okay, that's it for this question. Thank you.
See ya.
Peace.